Hey, what's going on YouTube? This is Devin with Jurassic Magic, and in today's video I wanted to upgrade the new Sultai Arisen Precon that is coming out of Tarkir Dragonstorm, and I gotta say, this Precon is pretty incredible. I like a lot of the reprints that are in here, along with some of the new cards. And if this is your first time looking at some of my Precon upgrades, I first focus on the new cards, then I focus on 10 upgrades, and 10 cards to cut out for yourself. And so now with that said, let's get it started. So first up, there are two commanders of the Precon product. The face commander is Kotus, Zibsig Champion, and this is just 3 mana for black, green, and blue. It's a legendary creature zombie warrior with a 3/3 body. Once during each of your turns, you may cast a creature spell from your graveyard by exiling 3 other cards from your graveyard in addition to paying its other costs. So in a way, this is basically just escape for your creatures. Not only that, whenever one or more creatures you control enter, if one or more of them entered from a graveyard or was cast from a graveyard, put 2+1/+1 counters on Kotus. So this one is quite unique. It's like an Underworld Breach just for your creatures. We've seen that before with the Master of Keys where it's an Underworld Breach for your enchantments. This one focuses on your creatures, only on your turn though. So this one's great with a graveyard strategy. Also, there is another backup commander with Tival the Balanced Scale. And I gotta say, I think I like this a little bit better. For 1 black, green, and blue, so 4 mana total. For a legendary creature, Spirit Dragon, with flying and with the 4/4 body. Whenever it attacks, mill 3 cards, then you may return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tap. And whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So I like this one a lot. I like the fact that it is essentially ramping you whenever it attacks. You could put a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield, and not only that, when those lands return from the graveyard to the battlefield, you're making a 2/2 zombie in addition, because technically those are leaving. Also, something I like about this commander is the fact that there's a lot of ways to leave the graveyard essentially. Crucible Worlds, if you have other lands in your graveyard, you could just return to the battlefield. You could reanimate a creature. You could even go into a delve strategy, exiling some cards from your graveyard. Even though if you exile multiple cards, you still will only make 1 zombie. That's just a little side note. So this one is pretty build aroundable. I like this one more, though I would say that you could build around both easily in this deck. And so now that I've talked about the commanders, let's talk about some of the new cards in the deck. One card I really enjoy is Colossal Grave Reaver. Not just the fact that this art looks incredible, I also love what it does whenever this creature enters or attacks, mill 3 cards. But on top of that, whenever one or more creature cards are put into your graveyard from your library, put one of them onto the battlefield. So if you mill 3 cards and one of those is a creature, you get to just put that directly on the battlefield. That's pretty crazy. 8 mana is pretty steep, but since you are in a reanimator strategy, this is easier said than done putting it on the battlefield. Another interesting card that has been getting a lot of buzz is Steward of the Harvest. This is 4 mana. When this creature enters, exile up to 3 target land cards from your graveyard, and creatures you control have all activated abilities of all lands exiled with this creature. So this one is quite interesting. You could go super degenerate and mean with this. If you use like a strip mine, all your creatures on the battlefield are a strip mine. Or you could use this a little bit more safe. If you exile a fetch land, all your creatures are essentially fetch lands that you could search your library for a land and put it onto the battlefield. But again, if you have a strip mine in your deck with this and you did exile it with a druid, you might lose some friends in the process, destroying all their lands. So I would just warn you there. But let's take a look at another dragon in the deck, Diviner of Mist. For 5 mana, it has flying, and whenever this creature attacks, mill 4 cards. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell from your graveyard with mana value 4 or less without paying its mana cost. If that spell would be put in your graveyard, exiled instead. So this is pretty good. It's all an attack trigger, so if you constantly attack with this, the more cards with mana value 4 or less, you get to pay without paying their mana cost. Again, in this deck, we definitely want to have a lot of ways of removing cards from the graveyard so that we get more value out of them. Tival's Judgment is really good. It's an enchantment for 3 mana. Whenever one or more cards leave your graveyard, choose one that hasn't been chosen this turn. This kind of reminds me of Monument to Endurance, but you draw a card, create a treasure token, or create a 2/2 black zombie druid creature token. So this is pretty good. In one turn, you could potentially activate all 3 of these modes to get the most value for your buck. And notice this is on any turn, it's not just on your turn. So for example, if you exile a card from your graveyard, you can make a treasure token with this on the battlefield. And then on your opponent's turn, if you just exile another card from your graveyard, you can make an additional treasure token on that turn, all separately. So this is pretty unique. I love the design of this. And the last new card I want to discuss with you to is Afterlife from the Loam. This sounds very familiar because it's like a play on Life from the Loam, which is also in the deck, by the way. But Afterlife from the Loam is really good. It has the delve ability, so in total this could just potentially cost 3 mana, but it has the ability for each player to choose up to 1 target creature card in that player's graveyard, put those cards onto the battlefield under your control. They're zombies in addition to the other types. So each player, including yourself, you're putting 4 different creatures on your side of the battlefield. They're going to be zombies, but that's completely okay. This does remind me of another card that I will talk about later, mainly because it's going to be one upgrade that I think you should put in the deck. But now that is what I'm going to be jumping into. 10 upgrades and 10 cuts. And I feel like overall this deck is pretty powerful, but if you want to tune it up a little bit more, here's my first suggestion. The first card I would take out is Reassembling Skeleton. Even though it's a staple in a lot of Aristocrat strategies, we're not necessarily using it in Aristocrats here. I mean, sure, yeah, it could leave the graveyard for 1 zombie, but that's really all it's doing. I mean, you could use it as a blocker and then get it back onto the battlefield, make another zombie, which seems good in theory, but I prefer this in a Aristocrats package. Since this is more of a reanimation package, why not include Reanimate? This is very cheap right now. It got a couple reprintings, and this is the most cheap, efficient way of reanimating a creature from your graveyard to the battlefield. For 1 mana, you are paying life in the process, but again, the benefits outweigh the cost. Just imagine putting some of those big dragons in your graveyard. You want to reanimate them somehow. You want to have a lot more tools like that so that you can get those big splashy effects that those dragons do have. But let's move on to my next cut. Satyr Wayfinder is okay for the deck, but I feel like it's Precon levels of power. It only really has an end of the battlefield trigger of putting cards into your graveyard, and of course if you have a land you can put it into your hand. You don't necessarily need that. If you want a better repeatable way of milling cards into your graveyard, all the while having them come back, is 6. So this is excellent. It is decently cheap, around like $5 to $6. It has reach, and whenever it attacks, mills 3 cards. You may put a land card from among them into your hand, and as long as it's your turn, non-land permanent cards in your graveyard have retrace. So you may cast a permanent card from your graveyard by discarding a land card in addition to paying their other costs. So that's great because we want things leaving the graveyard so they get more value. Plus, not only that, we are milling cards into our graveyard and putting a land into our hand, so that'll help trigger Taval, along with casting something else from the graveyard by discarding a land. And if we have a Crucible of Worlds effects on the battlefield, we'll get even more value, getting more zombie druids on the battlefield too. But I do want to move on to the next card that I would cut, and that is Woe Strider. It does have escape, so it can escape from the graveyard, but again, we're not really in an Aristocrats package, even though it can be useful with all the zombies we do make on the battlefield. I'd rather overwhelm our opponents. So Woe Strider I don't believe is necessarily good, even though it is a free sack outlet and it does enter the battlefield with a white goat. I just think it's too costly for what we're trying to do, especially with a huge amount of creatures that are like 5, 6, 7 CMC. And in this deck, I would want to have more mill effects and more reanimation effects. So that's why I think Ripples of Undeath is a great card selection in this deck specifically. At the beginning of a pre-combat main phase, mill 3 cards, then you may pay 1 and 3 life if you do put a card from among those cards into your hand. So this is an engine for ourselves. If we have Taval on the battlefield, we could pay 1 and 3 life and put one of those into our hand from the graveyard, so we get to put a zombie on the battlefield additionally. Another card that doesn't necessarily synergize with our deck is Dothy Voidwalker. It is pretty good overall, but it's not really going towards our game plan of reanimating creature cards from our graveyard to the battlefield, or even putting lands on the battlefield. It really is just exiling anything that goes into the graveyard from anywhere. You're exiling it instead, but of course that's obviously on your opponent's side of the battlefield. It's not affecting you. Don't get me wrong, this is a really good card. I just don't think it's necessarily going to fit into our strategy. That's why I think something like Hedge Shredder is excellent. Whenever it attacks, you may mill 2 cards. Whenever 1 or more land cards are put into your graveyard from your library, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and it does have crew 1. So what's very good about this, if you mill 3 lands with Taval, all those get to go into the battlefield. Then you can trigger Taval. You only trigger him once, but of course the way that it would work is you use Taval's ability to put 1 land onto the battlefield, then the other 2 that you milled will get to go onto the battlefield with Hedge Shredder's ability too, so you get to make 2 zombie druids. So this is a great engine. Of course it has crew 1, so you can swing with it itself. And really any other time that you're milling with your library, you get to put all lands from that were milled that way into your battlefield. This is an excellent choice. And next up, I'm going to group a couple of these together. I would take out Necromantic Selection, Casualties of War, and Living Death. These are all essentially just great options in a deck, but they are really high in the CMC cost. 7 mana, 3 mana, 6 mana. Casualties of War can be great removal, but there are other options that you can choose from that can be better. Living Death, you are probably going to exile a lot of creatures you control, like all the zombie druids, so I don't necessarily think that's worth it. And plus, each player will reanimate something if somebody else has a reanimator deck. This is going to be way better for them than probably is for us. And Necromantic Selection, we destroy all creatures. Obviously, we can put a creature card from a graveyard under our control, but I think again there are some better better selections that I'll talk about next. So in place of those, I would have the following 3 cards: Toxic Deluge, Lich Knight's Conquest, and Death Begets Life. I know that some of these are pretty much the same CMC, but I feel like each of them are a lot better than their other previous counterparts. Toxic Deluge is a lot better of a board wipe. Death Begets Life, even though it is pretty expensive, at 8 CMC, you destroy all creatures and enchantments, draw cards for each permanent destroyed this way. You get to draw an insane amount of cards. And with Lich Knight's Conquest, I like this a lot better than Living Death in this deck specifically, because you sacrifice any number of artifact enchantments or specifically tokens, especially in our deck, where we have a lot of zombie druids in the battlefield. You return that many creature cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. Unlike Living Death, this is only focusing on you sacrificing stuff to put cards onto the battlefield, and with all the zombie druid tokens, this can be a great win con for you. Another really good creature card, even though technically a lot of people call it a planeswalker, is Deathrite Shaman. This is an excellent card in the deck, mainly because you tap it, exile target land card from a graveyard, add 1 mana of any color, or you could pay a black and tap it, exile target instant or sorcery card from a graveyard, each opponent loses 2 life, or pay a green, tap it, exile target creature card from a graveyard, you gain 2 life. This is really good because you're only doing 1 instance of exiling a card from a graveyard, which will help activate Taval's ability of making a zombie on the battlefield. So this is a really good card. I like this card in place of Skull Prophet. Even though Skull Prophet is a mana dork too, it is milling 2 cards when you tap it, which can be pretty good. But we do have a lot of decent mill options. Skull Prophet, it's okay, but I don't think it's the best for this deck, and I would absolutely replace it with Deathrite Shaman. Another card I'm not really a big fan of in this deck is Anthem Mutineer. Even though it can be pretty good, I would replace it with something like White of the Reliquary. This one is pretty good in this deck. It has Vigilance, and you get a +1/+1 counter for each creature card in your graveyard, and has a tap ability: sacrifice another creature, search your library for a land card, and put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. So this is really good if we have a lot of those zombies on the battlefield. We could just tap this, sacrifice one of those zombies, and get an extra land. This is just going to help us ramp a little bit further, and notice it's any land. It doesn't specify for a basic land card. So White of the Reliquary is an excellent choice. But let's move on to the last card of the entire list, and this one for me can be a really good win con, and that's Sir Conrad the Grim. Whenever another creature dies, or a creature card is put into the graveyard from anywhere other than the battlefield, or a creature card leaves your graveyard, Sir Conrad the Grim deals 1 damage to each opponent, and it does have an activated ability by each player milling a card by paying into that mana cost. So let's just put it this way: we have a serious amount of creatures going into the graveyard, because if you look at the deck list, this has a ton of creatures. If we're looking at the deck list alone without any upgrades, it has 37 creatures total. So the amount of triggers that this can activate can be huge, because not only are creatures going into the graveyard, they're also leaving the graveyard too, with the reanimation effects or otherwise. So a card that I would replace this with is Necropolis Fiend. Even though it does have the delve mechanic, it can be pretty decent. It can only cost 2 mana, but you are exiling 7 other cards in your graveyard. I don't know if that necessarily is worth it just for a flying 4 or 5 body, but it does have a good activated ability by exiling X cards from your graveyard. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn. Again, that can be pretty useful, but I think Sir Conrad or other options like I mentioned previously can be a better fit in this deck. So that is it. 10 upgrades, 10 cuts. Let me know down below in the comments, what are your thoughts? What other cards would you put in this deck or even take out? Overall, this deck is pretty cool. There's a lot of cool landfall strategies mixed in with some reanimator. So if you can, on your way out, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. With that out of the way, thank you for stopping by.